Hello, welcome to Outlaw Bookseller. Today, book haul, huge book haul. This could be one of the last sort of big book hauls, really, because I have to cut back. And this is one with a difference because every book I'm going to show today, bar one, is brand new. I've literally bought them today and I got them from the shop I work in. And that was because I had a loyalty award for a certain number of years service. And, you know, before that, you get the equivalent of a book token. So I had a couple of £100 to spend, which was nice, and I still got a bit left. So I bought some books for the video widow, you know, got her some art books and stuff, things she wants, and I've got a pile of stuff. So of course I have things aside and ordered things in specially. So I'm going to show you a load of things, very, very varied. We're going to start with non-fiction because I do like non-fiction and I've got a little bit of non-fiction. There's some SF here, there's some crime here, there's some general fiction, all sorts of stuff. Some of this I'll be reviewing on the channel as things go forward, but we'll begin with the non-fiction. And this is something which popped out without me noticing. This is a book by John Gribbin, 9 Musings on Time. And the subtitle is Science Fiction, Science Fact and the Truth About Time Travel. Now, one of my favourite science books is In Search of Schrodinger's Cat by John Gribbin, which I've read probably half a dozen times. Really good book. And this is about the idea that, of course, according to physics, time travel isn't impossible. It's just very, very difficult. So he decides to look at actually doing it. And what he does, he looks at several famous SF stories and novels by all sorts of people and sort of looks at them as case studies. So that'll be really good. So that's of SF interest. So 9 Musings on Time. And who does he cover? Let's have a look. If we glance at the index, Robert Heinlein, Jack Williamson, Buddy Holly, all sorts of people. Poole Anderson's Tau Zero, Gregory Benford's Timescape, Benford's Cosm, Ray Bradbury's story Sound of Thunder, which we all love, L. Sprout de Camp's Lest Darkness Fall, Childhood's End, all sorts of stuff. Philip K. Dick's Counterclock World, Man in the High Castle, David Giles, The Man Who Folded Himself, Joe Haldeman's Forever War. Get the idea. So there's tons of SF content in here. So that'll be really good fun. Looking forward to that. Might read that soon. I am in a bit of a Vietnam mode at the moment because I've just recently rewatched The Deer Hunter for the first time in years. Always struggle with it, but enjoyed it this time around. And I also watched the final cut of Apocalypse Now, which is obviously a classic film. And that's made me pick up some Lucius Shepard that I'd read for a long time. There'll be more about Lucius Shepard coming on the channel soon, probably. But I decided to read this. This is Tim O'Brien's If I Die in a Combat Zone, which is a memoir. Tim O'Brien is an American novelist who's amazing, and he fought in Vietnam, and most of his fiction is about Vietnam because it had a big impact on him. And this is his autobiography, so I mean to read that for ages. And this will be the 3rd book I've read by him, so looking forward to that because I am in that sort of NARM mode at the moment. Then, this is a book I came across in work that I didn't know was out. And I was delighted because it's by an author I really like. I did a video about her in the early days of the channel, long time ago. And this is published by John Murray. And it's a really nice book. And they do these lovely travel books, travel writing. And this is Isabel Eberhardt, Desert Soul. And Isabel Eberhardt, I think she died around about 1904. Let's just have a look. Yeah, 1877 to 1904. I'll show you a picture now. There she is. She was pretty cool. And she had a fascinating life. Her father was like an anarchist and she lived in North Africa. She was sort of Swiss, German, mixed European sort of descent. And she went to live in the Sahara and she smoked keef, which is marijuana. She converted to Islam. She was a journalist. She was killed in a flash flood, very sad. And she wrote some brilliant, brilliant pieces. Her short story, The Oblivion Seekers, is just amazing. And she's like sort of one of the mothers of the counterculture. So fantastic to get a book by her I'd never seen before. So that means I now have 4 books by her. And so she's quite young when she died. So Hoover is quite small. So I was really delighted to just come across that. What fun that was. Then, something controversial. I do find I really enjoy politics books these days and current affairs. Maybe it's my age that I'm becoming serious as I grow older. But this is something which is a hardcover last year. And this is Hannah Barnes's Time to Think. So this is a bit of journalism. And it was shortlisted for the Baillie Gifford Prize for Non-Fiction. And it's the inside story of the collapse of the Tavistock's Gender Service for Children. So this is about children who think they're trans and what happened at a particular clinic in the UK. And I thought, you can see headlines and sound bites, but it's sometimes good to read proper journalism. So that'll be quite interesting to see what's been happening there. So that's my non-fiction. The rest is fiction. And we'll just go, it's not in any particular order. So I'll start with some of the older books. This is one from, let's have a look. When is this from? Let's see. 2013. This is Sleep Donation by Karen Russell. I remember this book coming out and then I completely forgot about it. And this is in the Vintage American Gothic series. They do a little range of these. These are the sort of things where there's 8 books in it. And it's the sort of thing where I would never buy all of them, because with series like this, there's always one or two that you just don't want. And there's a Toni Morrison book in this. And as Scott Bradfield said, Why I Hate Beloved by Toni Morrison, I think is the title of one of his essays. And anyway, Sleep Donation, what it's about? It's about a situation in America where suddenly people can't sleep. Nobody can sleep. Everybody's got insomnia. So it's got like a speculative element, which I think is quite interesting. And this is, there are some people who can sleep and they have to be volunteers to look after everybody else. And I thought that was really interesting looking, and a great jacket, as I'm sure you'll agree. Other books in this series include The Girls by Emma Cline, which is a kind of Manson family thing. It was a big bestseller some years back. I struggled to read it because people were saying I'm good, and people didn't say I'm good in the 60s. I don't care. Fight Club by Chuck Palahniuk. There's some real classics in here, like Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne and Light in August by William Faulkner, and they do an Edgar Allan Poe. But yeah, I thought that was really interesting, and it's quite sort of slim and sharp, and you know me, I like a short book. A book I've meant to read for years and years and years and years, by one of America's great journalists, Joan Didion, and this is her, I think this is her only novel, and this is Play It As It Lays, which came out late 60s, early 70s, and she did all sorts of amazing journalism, really, really good. There's a documentary about her, which I think is on Netflix, and the photograph on the cover is not her, that's Eve Babbitt, who was a model and writer in California in the 70s, who was very, very good. And she's playing chess there with Marcel Duchamp. And yes, she's got no clothes on. Shocking. But this is sort of like Bret Easton Ellis before Bret Easton Ellis. At least that's the vibe that I get from that. So I meant to read that for years. Then we have a bit of SF. Recently, there were some reissues of Ursula K. Le Guin's books. Le Guin, Le Gan. I'm going to say Le Gan because I'm Welsh. And I thought I had this book, and I looked at my shelves and I realised I didn't. And I think you'll think this is really beautiful. And this is A Fisherman of the Inland Sea, which is short stories from the 90s. I think they're mostly Hainish stories, I seem to remember. And really, really beautiful. And I thought they'd done a lovely job. And it's Gollancz, but they made it look like a mainstream novel. Because, of course, these days, Ursula, everybody's reading her, but of course, we got there first. So yeah, I thought that was absolutely lovely. And I was surprised to find I didn't have it. It's a 1990s book, and I wasn't sort of keen on what she was doing later, but I'm sure that'll be a fantastic read. Somebody who you never hear much about these days, Latin American writer. I'm trying to think exactly what his nationality was. He was born in Portugal. I know he was Portuguese. Maybe he wasn't Latin American. I always think he's Latin American, but he's not. He's Portuguese. And you don't really see a lot of Portuguese literature out there. And this is Jose Saramago, who's famous for a book called Blindness, which in some ways reminds me of Rupert Thompson's book, The Insult, the other way around, of course, or of The Glamour by Christopher Priest. But this is the double. And this, as you'd expect with the title, is about a guy with a doppelganger who's an actor who resembles him physically in every way. And I think, doppelganger stories are always interesting, and they go way, way back. And of course, there's The Double by Dostoevsky, isn't there? So this sort of goes way, but is it Dostoevsky or is it Gogol? I can't remember. I think it's Dostoevsky. Shows you how little Russian literature I've read recently. But I thought I'd give that a go, and I quite like that impressionistic cover. Vintage generally make no effort with their books, The paper is cheap. The covers are usually bad, but I thought that was quite good, and I thought I'd give that a try, because I'll admit my reading of Portuguese novels is very minimal. Then, an old favourite that I already have several copies of, and you think, well, do you really need another one? And this is J.G. Ballard's The Drought. There we go, in the current 4th Estate edition. And the reason I bought this is because it's got an introduction by M. John Harrison, which I have read, but because it's M. John, it's really good. I'm a Ballard completist, I'm an M. John Harrison completist, it seemed natural. And it's also got a quote by Brian Aldiss on the cover. It's ideal. What really annoys me about the current editions of Ballard's works in 4th Estate is they've all got forwards by people who, they're all the wrong people. There isn't a single forward or introduction by Michael Moorcock. There's one by Ian Sinclair, there's one by Robert Macfarlane, who tends to look down on SF. And I just thought, you know, it's all the wrong people. There's not a single one by Priest. It's all sort of, you know, the sort of novelists who, in a way, I feel they're kind of fawning at Ballard's feet, and, you know, and so they should in some ways, but they just seem like the wrong people to me. But it's a very beautiful cover. This is my favourite early Ballard, as I'm sure I've said on the channel before. I think it's really special, and the M. John Harrison essay is really good. So you can never have too much JGB, and there will be a lot more coming on the channel. There's been some already, of course. People are asking for more, and I am very much in the mood to reread a lot. I've been rereading some of the short stories, and just great stuff. I do love his work, I really do. So there'll be more Ballard coming up. Then crime. I think I said in my last video, or in a recent video, that I was kind of over crime fiction, and I am really. I've got bored with the sort of plot side of things, the detection side, and, you know, admittedly, I've always been more on the sort of anti-hero or the criminal sort of side of things, instead of the detective or the police procedural, even though I've obviously read a lot of those sort of things as well. But this is something quite special, and it's by somebody who was, you know, really important crime writer, really important noir pulp writer, and it's in the new sort of Penguin Green crime series. They've just done a 3rd tranche of these, and the impression I get in work, I was talking with a friend of mine, and we were sort of agreeing that we hadn't sold a lot of them. But this one is something special, and this is I Married a Dead Man by Cornell Woolrich. Now, Cornell Woolrich was a really important noir figure, and there's a quotation by Ray Bradbury on the cover, which basically says, deserve to be discovered and rediscovered by each generation. And I think that's true. I've read a few of Woolrich's books. Some of them were filmed by Hitchcock. Let's see, Rear Window, you know, it's Hitchcock. Also The Bride Wore Black. And there is a horror film by one of the Val Lewton horror films. The Leopard Man was written by him as well. And nearly every Woolrich book published has black in the title. This one's an exception. And this is about a woman who, she's pregnant and she's been abandoned. And she's involved in a train crash. And when she comes around, her identity has been mistaken for somebody else. And she decides to take on that person's identity to give her and her baby a different life, but it has unexpected consequences. So that's my sort of crime fiction. It's noir. It's about the malice or misdirection in ordinary people, and I think that's really interesting. And his prose can be like absolute treacle, you know, very, very grim. And he died in like a flop house hotel or apartment. He had his leg amputated. He lived with his mother a lot. Quite sort of tragic life. Very, very gloomy. So yeah, so that's a little exception to my no more crime sort of thing, which I've been going through. Now, this book, which I'm going to show you next, is a book which I've wanted to read for quite a long time, and I've known it was coming for 8 months. It's just appeared, and this is the book I think I'm most excited about reading this year. And this is The Singularity by Dino Buzzati, which is an Italian science fiction novel from the early 1960s. Now, I'm a massive Buzzati fan. His literary fantasy, The Tartar Steppe, also known as The Stronghold in the current US edition, as one of the, I would say it's in the 2 most moving books I've read this century for me personally. And I did a video about The Tartar Steppe and Buzzati probably about, I think it was about 6 months ago. and I think the title is the most moving literary fantasy I've ever read, and I shot it on Capri, so do check that out as well. Buzzati, a real talent, science fiction, fantasy, general fiction, graphic novels. He was a newspaper reporter, absolutely fantastic. This is about artificial intelligence and the creation of artificial souls, so I'm really excited to read that. So that will be the next book I read in all probability. Brilliant. And that may well be my SF pick of the year. And I don't think it's been available before in English, or certainly not for a very long time. And when it was available, if it was, it had a different title. So yeah, so I'm really quite excited about this. Yeah, published originally by Mondadori in Milan. So it could well be that this is the first English edition. Brilliant. Love it. And I love NYRB. They're such cool looking books. They're just brilliant. I'd love a whole set of them. If I were going to collect one imprint and buy everything just for the sake of it, it'd be NYRB Classic. New York Review of Books Classics. Right. Now, earlier on I mentioned Scott Bradfield. And Scott Bradfield, if you don't watch Scott's channel, you should, because he's a great writer. He's very well read and he's a very, very funny man. He did a video called What Are We Going to Do With All These Books by Joyce Carol Oates, because she is incredibly prolific. And Joyce Carol Oates, she's written loads of novels, short stories, essays. She generally writes general fiction, but some horror stories as well. She's quite revered in the world of horror. And I've never read her. I've been selling her books for years, but you do get sort of daunted by the sheer large amount. So I decided to buy this one, and this is Night Gaunts and Other Tales of Suspense by Head of Zeus, and I believe these are fairly recent short stories, so I'm going to give that a go, and if I enjoy it, I'm going to do a novel. One of my friends I work with is a huge fan of her, and he doesn't read much fiction, but he raves about it, so that's going to be an interesting one. I don't know when I'll get around to reading all this. We'll have to see, I guess. Then, new stuff. You will have noticed that this year, two of the books I've enjoyed the most of general fiction are by young female writers. I read Boy Parts by Eliza Clark and My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Tessa Moshfegh, which is probably the best book I've read this year. That came out in 2018. So I am on the lookout for interesting looking books by contemporary female authors. This is one, again, a friend of mine in work recommended. And this is The Sharing Economy by Sophie Berebi, and this is set in Amsterdam in 2014. I'm going to Amsterdam later this year, so maybe this will flash up then. Maybe I'll read it when I'm there or on the way there or what have you. And it's about somebody who works in the art world, and she's introduced to a new dating app. So it's like a sort of thing like Tinder or something. I got no idea how these things work myself, being an old guy. And she gets involved with that. So it is about sex and the way the technology has affected sexuality in our lives that way, which is pretty interesting. So to me, this is pretty much like SF. But it's looking back at the sort of birth of those things around about 2014. So that'll be an interesting one. I'll probably do that one quite soon, because following up Boy Parts and My Year of Rest and Relaxation, as I say, I'm interested in what young female writers have to say at the moment, as long as they're willing to say something outside the box, which is good. Another one, somebody else I've meant to read for ages, is Catherine Lacey. And this is a biography of X. This came out in a hardcover last year, and I looked at it and I thought, am I going to go there? I'm not certain. And it had rave reviews. And it is a look at a fictional iconographic character, an iconoclastic musician, artist, general creative type called X. And when X dies, her widow starts to write her biography. So obviously there's a sapphic element there. And it's quite interesting because the backdrop is a dystopian one. So technically it's SF, a fascist theocracy that split from the rest of the USA after World War II. And that's the Deep South, of course. So this is an alternate history. So it's looking at iconography and somebody who's an artistic icon against the backdrop of an American alternative history. And I thought that sounded fantastic. So I'll let you know how that is. Catherine Lacey. Many of her books are really interesting. So there we go. We'll see. So the speculative thing is there, as you can see. Now, you will remember that late last year, it would have been about October, November, I read my first Joel Lane. And I had mixed feelings about it. It was short stories, with common characters and common background. And it was good. And I decided to sort of have a crack at the rest of his oeuvre. So I bought 2 more books by him. And this is a short novel. The Witnesses Are Gone. And really nice livery. I really like that. And this is published by Influx Press. Influx Press is run by Gary Budden, who I talked about a few weeks ago, who was my new favourite author for about a week. We like Gary's stuff. And it's got an introduction by M. John Harrison. I mean, it just gets better and better, doesn't it? And it's about a guy who moves into an old house and he finds a box of VHS cassettes. And one of them has a bootleg of a disturbing film by a French director. So it has, again, affinities with Nicholas Royle's book, The Director's Cut, which I reviewed recently on the channel. So that's going to be a good one. And it's nice and fleet and brief as well. So that's going to be good. So another Joel Lane. This is a much bigger one than the others. This is The Blue Mask. Now, The Blue Mask, of course, was an album by Lou Reed, which featured Robert Quine, the lead guitarist of Richard Hell and the Voidoids. That was way back. That would have been like late 70s, early 80s. And this is about a student in Birmingham. It was published in 2003. It's about an attack that he suffers on a canal towpath. And Adam Neville has got a quote on the back. Adam Neville, good horror writer, Adam Neville. Really, really good. And so this is a full-blown novel. So I think we're going to see that this is like a psychogeographical horror novel, but really beautiful, I think you'll agree. And his prose is very good. It was the repetitious quality of the character and the stories in the one I read, which is Where Furnaces Burn. I very much felt that had I read them all individually in different periodicals, I'd have loved them. As one book in one sort of sitting or 2 sittings, it was too much, but we'll see. So yeah, so a bit of sort of urban horror there. Then somebody else I've also mentioned in the same breath as the likes of Joel Lane and Gary Budden is Gareth E. Rees, who wrote a book called Unofficial Britain, a non-fiction book, which I read a few years ago. And I decided to get some Gareth's fiction because I hadn't really twigged that he'd done fiction, which is not like me. And I thought I'd get these. And this is an interesting one, another Influx Press book. This is Terminal Zones, and it's got a really good cover. I like this, got the train ticket there. And I've read the first one of these, which was, I would say it was it's a Lovecraftian horror story. So I think this is going to be a mixture of psychogeography, horror, SF, what have you. And Gareth's quite a witty guy. I found that is non-fiction. So I'm going to give his short stories a try, let you know what I think. And this is his novel, The Stone Tide. This is published again by Influx Press, so I obviously have a thing for it at the moment. This has an introduction by, it's an introduction, it's got a quotation by M. John Harrison, and he says, "The funniest, most readable, most intelligently self-searching book I've read in years." Well, that's good enough for me. It's called The Stone Tide, Adventures at the End of the World. And this is a funny one because the central character is called Gareth E. Rees. So it's kind of a metafiction here. So fiction about fiction, I think. And the character moves into an old house in Hastings. Christopher Priest is living in Hastings. And he begins to piece together an occult puzzle connecting Aleister Crowley, John Logie Baird, of course invented the telephone, and the Piltdown Man hoaxer. So very interesting stuff. So we will see. As I say, I've heard this is an SF novel, but I'll let you know when I read it. Huge stack of stuff here. Then we finally end up with some bigger books. And this was something which I've never read this. I used to have an American edition and I got rid of it. And I thought, well, I should have that really. And I have the other books in this series in this livery. And this is Tales from Earthsea by Lagan again. And nice blue cloth Gollancz. And very, very beautiful. Nice blue end papers. And it's got some illustrations. And yeah, and short stories. And I say I've not actually read these ones. I think this is the only Earthsea book I haven't read. It is. I've read the initial trilogy, Tahanu. I read The Other Wind when it came out. I've got a first of that. But I thought that was really nice. And sort of silver gilt boards there. technically speaking, it's not gilt because gilt refers to gold, doesn't it? But we're in that ballpark, so that's embossed. But very, very nice. I think you'd agree. The only problem with these things is the publishers put a sticker on the back with the barcode on, and you peel it off and it leaves residue. What they should really do is print it on the inside, the back. That would be much nicer, but of course they don't, because Gollancz can't be bothered. I know I'm down on Gollancz a lot these days, but quite frankly, they rest on their laurels. They really do. So, into the home stretch. When I got to work this morning and I opened the door, turned the alarm off, went downstairs to put the aircon on and put the lights on, and I found this book face out on a display, and I was absolutely delighted because this is somebody I hadn't seen a new book by for years and years and years, and it's in a very handsome trade paperback from Melville House. And this is Jonathan Carroll, and it's Mr. Breakfast. And I thought, Jonathan Carroll, really? Now, those of you who were reading the 80s will remember Jonathan Carroll. He appeared then. His books were always, they were fantasy, but they were sword and sorcery. And this gets described more like magical realism. But he said some very surreal things. Outside the Dog Museum was the one that sticks in my head. Sleeping in Flame. Interesting writer. And this is about a chap who is a comedian, but his life hits a dead end, and he is having all sorts of problems. The person he's in love with leaves him, and he doesn't know what to do next. So he gets in his car and decides to drive across America. And when he's on the way, he stops in, where is it, North Carolina, and he gets a tattoo. And apparently after that, everything changes. And that sounded to me like a cross between Paul Auster's The Music of Chance and Paul DeFilippo's Roadside Bodhisattva. And I thought, well, it'd be nice to read Jonathan again. And it looked really quirky and American. And I thought, lovely. It's a beautiful book as well. I think you'd agree. So that one was a little serendipitous find this morning. Then, a book that I'm going to review on the channel very soon, because I'm going to reread it, because I've read everything in it. It's a short story collection. There is a fair amount of discussion about it online, and it's one of my favourite writers of all time, and that's Harlan Ellison, and this is Harlan Ellison's greatest hits. On Herald Classics, which has got wraps, which is really nice. It's got decorated end papers, green with little white stars on them, and I have to say, I think they've done a beautiful job. Now, I do have issues with this book, and I'm going to tell you what they are now and talk about them in more depth when I review it. I hope to do that within the next couple of weeks because, as I say, it's an excuse to read all this wonderful stuff in here. It doesn't contain Ellison's greatest hit, A Boy and His Dog, which won the Nebula Award. It's possible that the Ellison estate is now looking at publishing that on its own with the other stories about Vic and Blood, the main characters in A Boy and His Dog, so maybe that's going to happen. Also, that's quite a controversial story. This has a trigger warning at the beginning, which I really don't like. And also, the text of one of the most famous stories, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, has an alteration in it, which is not good. We'll talk about that when I review it. But this has just got loads of amazing stuff in it. So it's going to be a good excuse to reread Harlan again. And it was so beautiful. And because I technically haven't paid for any of this, I got all this free with my loyalty award. I couldn't just not buy it. And I've said online on Harlan Ellison pages that in the 40 years I've worked as a bookseller in the UK, in that time there has been no mass market Harlan Ellison books available to sell. There's only been print on demand ones, which is a terrible situation. So it's delightful to have this and be stocking it where I work and selling it, which is great news. So there we go. One more to go, and then one book which is new. And this was something which kept speaking to me from our anthology section, because it's a nice big book, and it was only $12.99 retail, which I thought was a real bargain for a large trade paperback. And that's the Penguin book of the Modern American Short Story. Absolutely lovely. Only $12.99. This huge, look. And it covers the years, let's have a look, from 1972 up to, quite recently, up to 2019. And there's a few writers I've read in here, but there's a lot of writers I haven't read. Funnily enough, there's a fair amount of SF in here. It's got The Ones Who Walk Away from Omerless by Lagan, which I mentioned on the channel last year. Great story. It's got, let's see, Ted Chiang is in here. And who else? Ken Liu, the Chinese-American SF writer. Stephen King's in here. Tobias Wolff, who I once did an event with, who's a fantastic writer. There's people on the edge like George Saunders. There's Tim O'Brien, who I had a book by earlier on, the Vietnam one, and lots of other things as well. And there's people I haven't read for years, like Raymond Carver. There's people I've always meant to try, like Jamaica Kincaid, Louise Erdrich. Lots of people I felt that I should read at least one story by. Hunut Diaz I have read, Jhumpa Lahiri, all sorts of fantastic stuff. And, you know, $12.99 is a snip. Beautiful, beautiful book. Absolutely lovely. I do like a nice anthology. We're going to finish off with a second-hand book, the only second-hand book of the haul, and I've got this today. And as you will have seen in the last video, I'm definitely in my sort of mopping up the late Silverberg. And here it is, The Mountains of Majapua in Demi US edition, Bantam, Jim Burns jacket. Absolutely gorgeous, I think you'd agree. So as you can see, I got quite a lot of reading to do there. And, you know, some of these things I might not hit for years. We'll just have to see. But the Bizzarti will certainly be reviewed soon, and the Ellison, those are the kind of top of the pile things. So I'll come to those and you see them soon. Hope you're having a great weekend, and I'll see you next week. Bye for now.